You know, I was taking a look at my channel and looking back at the videos I uploaded over the course of this year, and there's definitely been a very negative slant lately, even more so than usual. Of course, I'm very critical of modern games, but even the older games I've covered seem to have a lot of major flaws in them. So I thought to myself, maybe I should cover a game that I'm mostly positive about, even though all games have their flaws. There are some games near and dear to my heart that I am willing to ignore those flaws, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm finally going to talk about one of my favorite franchises, Ratchet & Clank. I've always been a huge fan of Insomniac games. Spyro the Dragon was the first game I remember playing, and it is my favorite game of all time. I've done a video on that. You can check that out if you're interested. And so, loving their PS1 games, naturally, as a kid, I also played their PS2 games, and I love them just about as much. The Ratchet & Clank games felt like a perfect evolution of the platformer genre. It added just enough action elements to not quite be a dedicated third-person shooter, and still have some fun platforming and exploration elements in the games, with just a small dash of RPG mechanics to keep that sense of progression. That being said, the Ratchet & Clank that you likely know today didn't really start out that way. The first Ratchet & Clank game definitely feels like that type of game where the developers are still figuring out exactly what they want to do with their vision. It still very much feels like a complete product, and it stands on its own, and it has certain elements that it actually does better than any of the other games. But the gameplay definitely wasn't quite there yet. And so, before we get into this, do the things the algorithm likes. You all know what that means. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me directly. And without further ado, let's rip ya a new one.
Oh, and by the way, you can stop calling me sir. The name's Ratchet.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir.
You got a name?
My serial number is V54296.
Oops. I'll just call you Clank for short. Hang on.
Honestly, it's crazy to me how long this franchise has lasted and how many games there are. It just seems like Sony never quite keeps any of its mascots around, except Ratchet & Clank. But Ratchet & Clank never reached the levels of popularity where, your average person knows what the franchise is. And so it's hard to say if the games are really underrated or not, because they're fairly popular and they always sell well. They're just not huge AAA million-dollar marketing type of shit ever, And while I'm sure a lot of people are excited to play the new one, and I wish I could, but I don't have a PS5, I still don't really think Ratchet & Clank will ever reach the levels of God of War or Uncharted or Last of Us, which is kind of sad because I feel like they deserve better. These games have always been fun, even the first game. But yeah, I always talk about gameplay first, so I guess we'll get that much out of the way because it's definitely the most dated element of the game, considering that pretty much every entry after this one improves the formula or at least tweaks it to keep it interesting. In this game, again, it almost feels like they didn't quite know if they wanted to make it a platformer or a third-person shooter. And the shooting mechanics certainly are not developed enough for it to be a hybrid of the two genres. This very much feels like a platformer with guns instead of a third-person shooter with platforming. If you played any Ratchet & Clank game, the movement is very familiar to you. You can double jump, long jump, high jump, glide with Clank, which in this game, you actually get that upgrade. You don't start out with any of Clank's glider abilities, but you get them pretty early on, so fundamentally it doesn't make that much of a difference, but it is cool that you get to see this staple ability of the series for the first time.
Ratchet, am I cool now?
Yeah, you the man, Clank.
You're welcome.
Of course, there's a whole bunch of guns, but the gun balance is absolutely terrible in this one compared to pretty much any of the other games in the series, if only because there's no sense of progression, really. At least not past the halfway point of the game, because there's no weapon leveling in this game. Once you buy a gun, that's what it does, which is fairly standard for anything else, but Ratchet & Clank is known for its weapons, which level up as you use them. So it's very weird going back to this game, where most of the guns are also just fairly standard things you've seen in other games. The blaster is a machine pistol, The Pyrocitor is a flamethrower. The Bomb Glove just throws a grenade, but only about 15 feet in front of you. The Devastator is a rocket launcher, and yeah, there's not really anything that crazy here. And half the guns are almost completely useless. Like the Mine Glove is just a shittier Bomb Glove. There's no point in the game where you need to lay mines down. And honestly, I could go through every gun, but really, it's easier to say what guns you should use than the ones you shouldn't, which is really just the Blaster, Devastator, and Visibomb gun. You could probably beat the entire game with just those guns, and save your money for other expensive things that you encounter in the game. Because a big staple of the first few Ratchet & Clank games is that you have to spend bolts for certain story items, and there's also permanent health upgrades that you can buy much later in the game. And of course there's the temptation of saving up for the Rhino, which anybody who's played the game remembers the Rhino scene.
Rhino for your robot. Trade you.
Well, okay.
Ratchet.
I'm kidding. Sorry, he's not for sale. What's a rhino anyway?
Rip ya a new one.
What did you just say to me?
R-Y-N-O. Rip ya a new one.
And I'm sure if this game was rated M, that would be rip you a new asshole. But that doesn't quite roll off the tongue, I guess. Now, it may be tempting to try to save up for it, but realistically, you can't get 150,000 bolts in one playthrough. You just can't. Well, unless you cheat, of course, which many people know of the original cheat, where basically you can glitch your way into the first hoverboard race by using the Hollow Guys, which turns you into a robot. Now, in the HD collection, they actually patched this, which is kind of a shame. But there is another way. You can use the Decoy Glove to glitch yourself into a wall. This is much more difficult to do than the original exploit, but still, if you want that Rhino, you gotta glitch onto the arena, and basically, you can just rubber band your circle button down and use the Taunter, which is another weapon you're probably never gonna use, because all it does is make enemies run straight toward you. But the Taunter can break boxes, and there are infinitely spawning boxes in this arena. And when you finally do get that Rhino after excessive cheating, of course, it's definitely worth it. That weapon is stupid overpowered for this game. Every Rhino iteration is extremely overpowered, as that's the point. In this game, it fires 9 rockets every time you shoot it, and has 54 bursts. It can basically kill the final boss in a couple of minutes. And that is an extensive boss fight, so trust me, that's a huge difference. But back to the gameplay mechanics, very, very, very important thing that's not in this game, that's in every other Ratchet & Clank game, is strafing. There's no strafing whatsoever, except technically you can strafe with the jetpack, but it's terrible. It feels like absolute shit, and you're never going to use it. And so that in itself makes the gameplay much more simplistic, and the controls feel a lot more wonky. But at the end of the day, this is kind of a kid's game, or... Well, honestly, that's actually doing it a bit of a disservice, because I won't really say it's a kid's game. It's kind of like a game for all ages, in a sense. And that was something I actually really enjoyed about the older Ratchet & Clank games. There's a famous video by the Gaming Brit Show called How Ratchet Lost Its Edge, and it's comparing this original game with the reboot, which I think I'll probably talk about the reboot someday, because I also despise it. It is one of the worst remakes of all time, because it's only half a remake. They didn't even remake this entire game, and it's essentially a movie tie-in game. But the point of that video is that the first Ratchet & Clank, and actually really the first 4 Ratchet & Clank games, were much like old cartoons, in that they had jokes for adults that I didn't understand when I was a kid. Now, I will say Ratchet & Clank's jokes are a little bit edgier, maybe more teenage than adult, really. But they're still funny jokes when you understand them.
Dad blast it!
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
I said, look, the plumber's back.
All right, wise guy.
There's actually a boob expansion Easter egg in this game. I think I'll just let the footage speak for itself on this one. On top of the weapons and platforming, there's also the gadgets. which are basically a combination of additional platforming mechanics. In the first game, there's just the swing shot, which allows you to swing from fixed points.
So you can sway to and fro like little insects.
And also a series of puzzle-solving mechanics. Pretty much in every Ratchet & Clank game, one of these gadgets is dedicated to unlocking doors in some small minigame. In this one, we have the Trespasser, which you just align lasers to parts of the grid, and there's shields that can block your lasers, and they're pretty simple overall. The Hydro Displacer is a sort of platforming puzzle item, where you can drain or fill water from various points to help you navigate the level. Somehow I almost forgot the Clank sections, probably because I've never been a fan of these in any of the games. Basically, the excuse in this game is that there are certain sections that Ratchet can't enter because he doesn't have the O2 mask yet, which lets you breathe where there's no oxygen. So you have to send Clank forward, and he goes off on his own, and basically you just command these little Gadgetbots. You can tell them to attack, follow you, wait, or enter a door, and that's it. The entire thing is just spent finding said Gadgetbots, making sure they don't get stuck on a wall somewhere, and just guiding them to the objective and hope none of them get killed. If they get killed, they respawn where you found them, but sometimes you have to backtrack super far if you don't know what you're doing. I've played these games enough times that doesn't really happen anymore, but I remember the first couple times, it was incredibly annoying going back to their spawn points to grab them so that we could finish the fucking level. You only do this a couple times in the entire game, so it's not really a huge deal, and the segments aren't really that long if you know exactly what to do, but honestly, they've just never been fun. In Going Commando, they're even shorter and more sparse in the game, so maybe that's the game that handled it the best, but somehow these sections have only gotten more obnoxious as the franchise has gone on. So then we have the level design. As with any platformer, level design is incredibly important. And given that this is a 3D platformer, there's a lot of different ways that they could have went about it, but they decided to go for a sort of semi-linear approach. They decided to go for the type of linear where it's multiple different linear pathways branching from the start of a level that you can do sometimes in any order, or some of them are actually completely optional. That will have some optional gadget you don't need, or gold bolts, which are the hidden collectible of the game. And gold bolts actually have a very interesting purpose in just this first game that they never use again, which is gold weapons. Normally, the gold weapons are only in New Game Plus, and they are permanent upgrades to any of the normal weapons that you can buy at a Gadgetron vendor, plus the suck cannon. But there is a super secret area after the Captain Quark fight where you can actually get access to some of the gold weapons, which I always thought was awesome. And one final staple that began with the very first game and is in basically every other game after this is challenge mode, which is essentially New Game Plus. While later games it actually would make the game harder, in this it doesn't. All it does is give you access to the gold weapon room, which, unlike the secret version, this one actually gives you access to upgraded versions of just about every weapon. And speaking of other optional content, this is how you know that this is an old game, because there are optional sections in some of these levels that are longer than the main path in said level. The most famous is Eudora, which is the forest planet. The way that the game drops you onto the planet, if you just go straight forward, you think, oh, this is the normal level, right? It's, roughly 10 to 15 minutes long, you kill a bunch of enemies, and when you get to the end, you get the suck cannon. So what does the suck cannon do? Well, exactly what it sounds like, pretty much. You can suck up small enemies and shoot them back out. And really, that's it. There's no limit to your sucking ability, but it can only hold a capacity of 5 enemies in this one. And you can just choose whenever to shoot them back out. And it's completely optional. You don't need to ever pick up the suck cannon. It's a great weapon, but it's completely optional. In fact, the actual path that you have to go down is you just hack a door, swing shot around a few platforms, and boom, you're done with the level. That's it. I know some people aren't going to particularly be impressed by something like this, But for me, I used to love when games went out of their way to have all this extra content that people might never do. Or at least subvert your expectations, as this level did, where the path you think you're supposed to go down is the optional path, and you get a great reward at the end of it. That's the type of polish and love and care for video games that you rarely see anymore. And we can't talk about the level design in this game without the actual atmosphere and visual aesthetics of these planets, because the beauty of Ratchet Clank, of all these games, is that instead of it just being a level, every level is a different planet that you travel to in the galaxy. And so the possibilities for the visual design is endless. You can theme a planet around whatever you want. And Insomniac did a great job of just doing some stereotypical level themes and just turning it into an entire planet. And it works. There's forest planets. There's a planet completely covered by smog. There's essentially a city planet. There's a desert planet at night. It's just stuff like this where you're sort of taking typical game tropes, but you're turning it into an entire planet. So it's more immersive and it feels more creative than it honestly is. For this being a PS2 game, it looks fantastic. This is what's great about having a cartoonish art style, is that you don't need a million polygons to sell you on the visuals. And so they just made it super dense.
It's so dense, every single image has so many things going on.
I mean, there's always spacecraft flying in the background in these levels, or robots doing their duties and stuff, and it really feels alive. It looks better than pretty much any other PS2 game. Even the next few sequels, oddly enough, have less atmosphere than this game. I guess that's the benefit of having lower quality models, is that you can have a lot more. I think it's a pretty good trade-off. Now for the story. Again, if you've played a Ratchet & Clank game, you might be wondering why I'm even bothering to talk about the story, because usually in these games, it's kind of just like your kid-friendly adventure to stop whoever the evil bad guy is, with some comedy thrown in there, maybe a little bit of drama. Well, that's not really the case in the first game. No, there's actual character development. Believe it or not, Ratchet is an asshole in this game.
He needs our help.
Yeah? Why don't you go help him? Into another trap? Well, go on. Go fight some evil.
At least I'm not a coward.
Whatever. As soon as I find Quark, I'm selling you for scrap.
And Clank is sort of the typical robot companion who doesn't really understand human emotions or motivations. And so he sort of represents the innocent sidekick who just wants to get the help of Captain Quark, who at the time of this game actually is a galaxy-renowned superhero somehow, despite being a complete fraud. And so at the time, obviously they retcon this later if you played all the games, we are led to believe that Clank is a glitch in this machine that's pumping out death robots. And so he escapes the planet and finds his way to Veldin and to Ratchet. And Ratchet just wants to explore the galaxy. That's pretty much his only motivation. He doesn't really care about saving the universe from the villain Chairman Drek, who Chairman Drek is honestly a pretty great villain. He's literally just a corporate billionaire guy who's especially ruthless. He is literally destroying planets to create his new planet to sell to the refugees from the destroyed planets. And then he plans to pollute the new planet he created, just like his original home world, which you explore in this game, Orxon. And so it's a very simple villain concept, but it's executed beautifully.
Lieutenant! Yes, sir. You have fulfilled your tree quota. Barely.
We are ready to return to base.
Not so fast, Lieutenant. Just because we don't need any more trees doesn't mean they should have them. Destroy everything.
And it's a look at a very cartoonish, late-stage capitalism type of universe. But I think it works. It's very over the top. And so basically what happens is Ratchet and Clank visit various planets in search of Captain Quark. Eventually they meet him in Blackwater City after bribing his trailer guard. And he sends him off to his personal death course, which I suppose should have been the first major red flag. You fight your way through a series of death machines, and of course, Quark betrays you because he's been working for Chairman Drek this whole time. and you defeat the Blargian Snagglebeast. And this is where Ratchet shows his true colors and just absolutely shits on Clank for his naivete.
This is not about Captain Quark anymore. There are innocent lives being lost.
Yeah? Well, I'm done with this stupid hero stuff. I got my own agenda now.
Ratchet, this is not like you.
What do you know about me? You've spent this whole time looking for Quark. You don't know anything about me.
It's pretty ballsy to have the main character of your game be an unlikable asshole, and while he does redeem himself later on and gains a sense of morality, I can admire what is essentially a sort of kid's game, like I said before, trying to teach empathy by having a very narcissistic protagonist. And it's a shame that this never really comes up again. Every game after this, Ratchet is just kind of the generic good guy, and believe it or not, Clank actually becomes a bit of a smartass, which is a complete 180 from his character in this game. But this one moment, for me, seals this being the best story in the franchise, which I'm sure a lot of people don't really care about the story in Ratchet & Clank, but I actually used to really care about it. And it's only when it became a generic good versus evil story in later entries and the comedy sort of took a nosedive, that's when I stopped caring. And yeah, I mean, comedy is a major element of this game. Everyone knows the plumber because he's shown up in like half the games in this series, but in the beginning, he literally was just a plumber.
Escape transports?
Newsflash, giant robots attacking! The escape transports are taking all the rich folks off this god-darn planet.
So why aren't you on one?
Socioeconomic disparity.
What?
He hasn't got enough bolts.
And honestly, I just think it loses a bit of its charm when it becomes meme-ified like it did in A Crack in Time. It's basically just the cabbage merchant thing from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but they turn him into a fourth wall breaking extra-dimensional being, which, I don't know, this is not really that amusing, I guess. It's too quirky for me. I don't want to spoil the whole story, obviously, but if you played any other game after this, you know Quark survives and goes on to wreak more havoc and eventually becomes a good guy. And Chairman Drek never shows up again, so you can probably guess what happens to him. I don't know, the story's always just kind of stuck with me. A lot of comparisons have been made between Ratchet and Clank and Pixar movies, but honestly, this story is the only one that feels like a real Pixar movie because it follows a typical structure of a story while still being a video game, because the pacing is actually very good. Very few of the cutscenes are longer than a couple minutes, and there's always 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay minimum between cutscenes, so it never gets obnoxious. And it tells a compelling story, so I respect that. So in conclusion, I love this game. It has some issues, mainly in the gameplay department, and every sequel improves upon that. And this is definitely not the best game in the series. Many people think the next game, Going Commando, is the best. It's not quite my favorite, but it's very close. It's usually between Going Commando or Up Your Arsenal, which is the third game. And I'd say just Ratchet & Clank in general is a very high-quality franchise. There's only a few games in the series that I would really say are just okay. Most of them are good games, and a lot of them are great or even amazing games. And this game, despite having a remake, which is a terrible fucking remake, the original game absolutely stands the test of time. It just doesn't have the same solid gameplay loop as later games, but it makes up for it in the exploration aspect and the story. So I highly recommend trying out this game if you get the chance. It's not quite as available on modern platforms as I would like. You can either play it on PS2, play the PS3 HD trilogy, or I believe it's on PS Now, but I don't know if it's even available on PS5 in any form. I don't know, to be honest. But if you do get the chance, definitely try this game. And if you're not impressed, just go straight to Going Commando. I guarantee you will love Going Commando.
Actually, I don't care who you are. I've got to get the heck out of here. I joined the army to get money to go to college. I never knew I'd end up in a war. Go figure.
And that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Remember to do the things the algorithm likes if you haven't already. And thank you to all my patrons. I did want to make a video on Necromunda, but I kind of decided that, honestly, I wasn't really that passionate about it. I mean, it's a good game. I give it a light recommendation, meaning that when it's like $20, You should probably pick it up if you like fast-paced shooters. It feels like a hybrid between Doom 2016 and like some of the RPG mechanics from like Fallout or something similar. I mean, really, if you played I Divine Cybermancy, it's much more close to that in the RPG department because Strayuman developed I Divine Cybermancy. I never played Space Hulk Deathwing. I heard that was just okay. But I will say that this game, Necromunda, is definitely a step in the right direction. But yeah, that's it. I'm not going to do a full review. It was fun enough, I suppose. And that's it. I don't know. I might stream again pretty soon just to do something different. And I'll see you next time, guys.